There is a quiet paradox in modern life. We speak about psychology more than any generation before us. We use its language fluently. Trauma, attachment, boundaries, dysregulation, narcissism, anxiety. These terms circulate in everyday conversation, across social media, in classrooms, in corporate settings. And yet, despite this fluency, many people feel increasingly fragmented, emotionally reactive, relationally uncertain, intellectually polarized, internally divided. This is not a failure of psychology. It's a reflection of how psychology has been absorbed into culture. Over the last century, psychology has advanced through specialization. We have gained extraordinary insight into the brain, into trauma physiology, into developmental attachment, into cognition and behavioral conditioning. Each area has matured in depth and precision. But specialization produces fragments. When knowledge is divided into domains, the public often receives those domains in isolation. A person may understand trauma responses without understanding belief formation. They may understand cognitive distortions without understanding attachment. They may understand emotional regulation strategies without understanding developmental history. Human beings, however, are not modular. Thought is not separate from emotion. Emotion is not separate from belief. Belief is not separate from culture. Behavior is not separate from development. These systems operate simultaneously. When they're studied separately, without structural integration, the result is conceptual fragmentation. And conceptual fragmentation eventually becomes lived fragmentation. You can know psychological terminology and still not understand yourself. You can identify patterns and still feel controlled by them. You can name a coping mechanism and still repeat it. Because insight alone does not reorganize the system. Integration does. The central question that guides the writing of my book, The Psychology of Being Human, an authoritative guide to mind, emotion, and meaning, was not how to simplify psychology. It was how to restore its architecture. Psychology, at its best, is not a collection of techniques. It's a framework for understanding how the human system functions across time. It accounts for perception and memory, emotional processing, attachment patterns, identity formation, behavioral conditioning, trauma imprint, belief construction, cultural influence, and meaning making. These are not separate chapters of life. They are interacting layers. When those layers are understood in relation to one another, something changes. Emotional reactivity becomes intelligible. Relational conflict becomes contextual. Behavior repetition becomes patterned rather than mysterious. Cultural polarization becomes psychologically legible. The book moves deliberately through these layers. It begins with the foundations of mind: perception, attention, memory, self-awareness. It proceeds into emotion and regulation, into resilience and dysregulation. It explores behavior and discipline, motivation and habit formation. It examines attachment and relational dynamics, belief systems and personal myth, trauma and shame, power and culture. And it concludes with integration and psychological maturity. Not because life unfolds in neat segments, but because understanding requires structure. Modern discourse often treats discomfort as pathology. Anxiety is framed as defect. Conflict is framed as toxicity. Ambivalence is framed as instability. Yet psychological maturity is not the absence of tension. It's the capacity to hold tension without fragmentation, to live with uncertainty without collapsing, to experience anger without becoming destructive, to revisit memory without becoming defined by it, to engage culture without dissolving into hostility. That capacity does not arise from information alone. It arises from integration. Integration is the process by which cognition, emotion, history, and identity become coherent across time. It's not self-optimization. It's not performance. It's structural alignment. This alignment matters not only at the individual level, but at the cultural level. When psychological literacy deepens, intellectual humility becomes possible. Emotional regulation improves collective discourse. Nuanced thinking replaces categorical judgment. The self becomes less brittle. Psychology, properly understood, is not a diagnostic enterprise alone. It is a discipline of understanding. It asks what systems are operating beneath behavior. It asks what meaning has been constructed around experience. It asks how development shapes perception and how perception reinforces belief. In an era defined by speed, stimulation, and ideological compression, the ability to think structurally about the mind becomes increasingly necessary. The Psychology of Being Human was written as a unified framework for that structural thinking, not as a manual, not as a motivational text, not as a set of answers, as a map that treats the human being as layered, adaptive, historically shaped, culturally situated, and capable of integration. Modern life will continue to generate complexity. Technology will continue to accelerate. Cultural tension will not disappear. The question is whether we develop the psychological maturity to inhabit that complexity without splitting internally. Integration is not automatic, it's cultivated. It is the work of bringing thought, emotion, behavior, belief, and memory into alignment across time. It is the work of understanding the systems we are inside and the systems we have internalized. That is the invitation of psychology, and that is the framework this book offers.